Alright, so chances are if you are new to Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, you will see the Commander role most likely grayed out for you, or even the Radio Man role. This is because only experienced people over level 25 are able to play the Commander role. But that doesn't mean this video isn't for you. If you are at level 25 or a day 1 Rising Storm 2 veteran, or you are nowhere near level 25, this video will explain to you guys how to effectively play the Commander role, as well as sort of like a guide to what you have available and how to sort of communicate with your team. There will be timestamps in the video description for your convenience, which is also where the like button is, so please help me out. Anyways, let's get into the video. Alright, so like I said before, you need to be level 25 to be a commander, and to actually do most of your duties as a commander, you will need to be at a radio station. These radios can be ones that are stationary, far from the battlefield, and primarily near your spawn point or a couple of 100 meters away, or someone who is at level 15 and up can be a radio man and follow you around. And I feel like I need to kind of say this, the commander is the most important person on the team. The second most important person is the radio man. Your job is literally to stay and be your commander's bodyguard. This is because usually the commander is more experienced and a better player, and having them sit so far back from the action, especially when the abilities are on cooldown mode, it's basically a waste of a player. So please, someone should always go radio man. And usually I like to have a friend of mine who recently got the game for Epic Games be my bodyguard, because it means that they're most likely to listen to me and follow me around, and I can sort of micromanage all the squads more efficiently. But yeah, I just want radio men to stick on the commander like a fly is to a piece of dog shit. But anyways, now I want to move on to what the commander actually has that they can use. Alright, so this is what you as a commander have available to you. So all nations, whether you are north or south, you can press the N key wherever you are on the map. You don't need to be at a radio station, and this will spawn in everyone who is queued up waiting to spawn, basically. Now the best way to use this is if you are on an objective point. This can surprise the enemy, especially if a large number of friendlies are waiting to spawn, especially if feels like after a napalm or artillery strike. Do not do this when you are 10 kilometers away from the objective, because instead they could have waited 15 seconds and spawned in a tunnel or on the squad leader who is much closer to the objective. It's a waste doing it when you're so far from the action. Secondly, every faction has access to an artillery strike. However, there is a slight difference between them that I kind of want to point out. Now, the National Liberation Front, the NLF, has a barrage rather than an artillery strike. This means it has the widest spread, meaning you'll want to be more careful when using this. It also has a mixture of artillery shells, rocket shells, and white phosphorus explosives. However, the People's Army of Vietnam uses an artillery strike that is more consistent and within a much smaller area of explosion, basically, meaning that it's not spread out. It actually hits your marker. They also use explosive shells, and there is no mix. You can probably see on screen what I'm talking about. Now, the United States Army, they have an artillery strike, but they have a pretty cool feature where it is also randomized in the sense that some shells land and hit the ground, but they also have airburst rounds which have a much higher blast radius and can kill people hiding in trenches, and basically it just has a larger blast area, basically, and it's much better than the shell hitting the ground. Then we have the Australian artillery, which is, it's a major downgrade because there aren't any airburst rounds, and the South Vietnamese don't even get artillery. They get a mortar strike, which is weaker than artillery, but the salvos fire much quicker. There's 9 salvos instead of 5. But I mean, I've only played as a South Vietnamese like twice, so it's unlikely you'll ever get to use it. Thirdly, all factions get access to a scout recon, which basically acts the same way a UAV does in Call of Duty. If the North Vietnamese calls it in, there is no way to actually counter it other than crouching or going prone till you see the ferns on the side. But if the Southern forces call it in, the scout recon is in the form of a reconnaissance plane that can be shot down by the North's anti-air. Now, I want to focus on the things that are faction exclusives, first starting with the North. So they get a thing called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This is a very useful ability since it halves the respawn time as well as the tickets of your teammates' deaths. I usually activate it once it becomes available, primarily because there's no downside to using it, and being able to pump out out as many troops as possible is vital. The North also has access to anti-air, which is useful for shooting down spooky gunships, denying enemy napalm or Canberra bombers, recon planes, and any helicopter that flies above 50 meters, I believe, for an extended period of time. Now onto the exclusives for the Southern Forces. They have access to a napalm strike, which just drops a napalm on the enemy, and it's good for cleaning out a point. They have access to an artillery strike, which also varies depending on the country, and a thing called a spooky gunship. However, Australia does not get a spooky gunship. Instead, they get a thing called a Canberra bomber, which is when two planes come in and drop a couple of bombs on a point. In my opinion, it's not better than a spooky gunship. It's pretty bad, if I were to say. Alright, so I nearly actually forgot to put this part in the video, but it's a very important thing that every commander should know, or even if you're not a commander, you might hear them say these types of things. So basically, it's called the keypad numbering system. And I'll admit, I'm a little slow. It did take me a while to kind of understand what it was, but it's very simple, so I'm going to explain. Alright, so we can see here, we're on the map resort. I'm playing as the Americans, and we're looking at the map. So we can see here that, let's say if I were to call an artillery strike on A, right on A. Now what I used to do, and many beginner commanders would say artillery strike H5, because I mean that's where A side is and that's where most likely the artillery is gonna come in. But that's the problem, right? Because when you say H5, you can see that the grid is actually very large. It varies depending on map, but most of the time the grids are very, very large, right? So basically, let's say we had friendlies scattered down below here. If I were to say artillery H5, it basically renders the whole quadrant or sector unusable according to my call out. So what you'd say is artillery strike H5 keypad 9, meaning that we can see here with the square, if we look at a traditional computer keypad, we'd see that it will be where number 9 is. So H5 keypad 9 will tell my teammates on the beach that the artillery strike is going to be coming up in the top right hand corner. And this means that they can still be in that quadrant, just don't go a little bit too high to the right. And the reason why this is important is because the Americans, South Viets, the Australians, and even the North Vietnamese, they get an artillery strike which is very concise. It's localized into one point like we saw previously. But I wouldn't really recommend doing this call out if you're playing as the National Liberation Front, primarily because the artillery spread is just so large that it isn't localized into one point, and it can spill out everywhere. But you know, the Americans and all the other artillery strikes mostly stay within a very confined space. Now, one of the most important things any commander should have and use is a microphone. I find that my experience as a squad leader is so much better when a commander is constantly giving orders and engaging with the team to ensure a victory. This is much better when a commander who might occasionally type in chat saying artillery strike F5 or something like that. I'd rather have a commander who's actually giving me useful information. Also, while you can type in the team chat, I wouldn't really recommend it, primarily because I often do find myself missing messages and you can't scroll up in the chat. I don't know how you can actually do that. I don't know if you can do that, but I mean, I do miss messages from the commander. Also, you might do something completely stupid like me and type in the all chat where an artillery strike is coming in. I have done that once by accident, which is why a key example as to why you should always use a microphone instead and make sure it says team or squad or whatever on the side. But things you should be telling your teammates are whether they're going to be flanked and, more importantly, where it's happening so they are aware. Because if a recon goes up, some of them might be getting shot at and they don't want to check their map. And in most maps, you will always face one direction. So saying things such as enemies flanking left side will indicate the people are coming on the left. Well, that's why I said it's left side. It's much more convenient than saying enemies flanking northeast with a vector. If you say left side, chances are they will know which side that is because all your friendlies and all the enemies are all facing one direction. But you should also be giving them other useful information such as snipers on top of roof on B site, be careful. It is useful information because hopefully the majority will kind of, learn not to expose their heads and to be more cautious. Other good communication tactics is to remind your squad leaders to place down tunnels, to not die, especially if you're playing as Southern Forces, especially if you're about to push a point, and also to use the binoculars to mark fire support coordinates. Also, don't hesitate tend to tell certain squad leaders to readjust their markers so you can call in a decent artillery strike. And another thing I tend to do as a commander, I always tell my team, obviously when an artillery strike, recon, Ho Chi Minh, I always tell them what I'm doing. If I say recon going up in 10 seconds, or I'm using the Ho Chi Minh Trail now, or anti-air going up 30 seconds, that's the type of things that I like to relay to my team so they know what is happening and when. So I could say artillery strike in front of B site, stand back, get under cover. That's good, useful information. Alright, so now I want to talk about some strategies that I often use. Now, this isn't going to work every time, but I find they are pretty effective. So first thing is, let's say you are playing as America on Hue City, because Hue is definitely one of the more popular maps. I don't really like that map, and I'm sick of playing it. But anyways, so let's say you capture both A and B side, and now the enemy is at that wall fortified. First thing I do is I'd set my own marker, my own artillery marker, request that squad leaders do the same. Then firstly, I put up a recon plane to get a general idea of where the enemy is mostly congested or clustered up. Let's say the bulk of them are here. Now, we don't want to use an artillery barrage primarily because using it directly on a point is completely useless, because sure, the enemy on the point might die, but the artillery strike lasts longer than 15 seconds, so they'll respawn and they'll just be waiting to get back onto the point because your teammates won't be able to get on it because there's a freaking artillery strike on it. So first thing I do is I call in a napalm strike, since that lasts, I'd say, around 10 seconds. So before doing that, I let my teammates know that a napalm strike is coming in on this coordinates. So the napalm strike comes in, kills a fair decent amount of enemies. Now they're going to be respawning. This is when you call in an artillery strike. Make sure it comes in behind the objective, because this means that the point isn't going to be barraged, but instead enemies that are trying to get back onto the point will have to go through that artillery barrage, and it just makes it harder to get back onto the point. And it can also destroy squad tunnels that are behind the point as well. But I mean, if you were to use this tactic, be careful about the artillery strike that you use because it varies on spread. Anyways, those are kind of my tips and kind of my explanation of how to be a good or decent commander. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, because if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Anyways, my name is Tan2, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.